Today, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to discuss a pyramid in southern Mexico at a town called Comocalco. But before doing so, I should answer some of the inquiries I have received from some of you as to how a marine biologist or biological oceanographer comes to be involved in archaeological studies. After World War II, I was engaged with others of my colleagues in the study of the sea floor. At that time, it was not possible to visit the sea floor as it is now. The submersibles didn't exist. So we had to lower cameras on wires and pull triggers and hope that maybe the camera would get a picture of the bottom of the sea. Well, during the course of that work, we would sometimes find remains of very ancient animals like these giant sharks, their teeth lying on the bottom. In some parts of the sea floor, the deposit of sediment is so slow, maybe only a millimeter in 1,000 years, that objects are kept visible for a long time. Objects that fall to the bottom of the sea remain visible for a long time. And also there are bottom currents which sweep the sediment away. Another kind of object found on the bottom of the sea are these spherical concretions, as they're called, chemical concretions that form down there. Another curious object, a kind of meteorite known as a tektite. We're not sure exactly where they come from. They seem to come from outside the Earth's atmosphere and fall to the bottom of the sea if they strike the sea. But in addition, we occasionally find evidence of man. In the Mediterranean, for example, pieces of earthenware called amphorae are very common. In ancient times, 2,000-3,000 years ago, oil and wine were shipped to and fro across the Mediterranean, and occasionally ships were wrecked, and the pottery on board was very durable, and the pieces are still found lying there. Amphorae are big. This is a small one. Most of them are big. They have two handles. That's what the word amphora means. And they have different forms according to where they come from. This is a North African one with its flat bottom. The rim is very strong, and that's a portion that normally survives. This is one from Italy, where they like to have a spike to fit the amphora in when it's being used. Here is a fishing weight that's made of ceramic also, a fishing weight lost by an Iberian fisherman about 2,000 years ago off the coast of Spain. It has his initial letters G.A. written on it, presumably his name. About this time, the international standard of measurement on the bottom of the sea came into existence in the shape of the American beer can, 12 centimeters long. Anything that's thrown overboard always ends up on the bottom of the sea. The story that they float about at some middle distance is quite incorrect. Everything goes to the bottom. And our photographs sometimes would show a beer can on the bottom. I'm going to refer now to some of these things again just to remind you of them by means of these slides. On the screen you'll see a group of these same ancient shark's teeth that I was holding a moment ago, of a quarter to give you the scale. Ancient artifacts made by primitive man occasionally are found on the bottom of the sea. This is from the Stone Age, and probably did not fall overboard from a canoe. It may have been left there at a time when the sea level was lower. Here are the pieces of the amphorae I was referring to a little earlier on. Very durable pottery. Now, at the same time I'm speaking about, just after World War II, scuba diving was invented by French naval officers, and they were able to visit some of the shallow water sites, discovering Roman and other ancient wrecks like the one you see here with amphorae tumbled on the floor of the sea. There's another site. You can see the immense amount of mercantile activity that must have taken place in ancient times from these extraordinary remains. And there is a single amphora, that's from North Africa. Early in the 1970s, scuba divers working off the northeastern coast of USA, began occasionally to find vessels looking like this one. Not an amphora, because there are no handles, smaller than an amphora. The Portuguese had also found them in archaeological deposits in Portugal, and they believed them to be a product of Roman industry about 2,000 years ago. They gave the name Amphoretto, meaning a little amphora, and that name was adopted in North America when they began to be found here. Here's another one. We're not sure what they contained. It's commonly thought oil, but it might have been dried fruit. But they were evidently shipped around the world, and for all we can tell, these ones were shipped across the Atlantic, originating from Portugal or Spain, we suppose. Shortly after the onset of the 1970s, Roman coins began to be found on certain parts of the northeast coast in Massachusetts. The 4 you see here were found with the aid of an electronic metal detector, all within the area of about 1 square yard. And although people first thought they were coins that a collector had accidentally lost, when the dates of the coins were worked out, it was found that they all came from a very short period of time during the 3rd century AD, and were much more likely to have been coins actually in a treasure chest or in somebody's pocket or wallet, all showing emperors who reigned within a very short space of time from one another. Now, you may remember that there was a very rich treasure found off the coast of Florida a few years ago, the subject of a vigorous lawsuit between the finders and the state of Florida. And this treasure was discovered because observers on the coast of Florida noticed that Spanish silver coins called pieces of 8 were washing ashore, and instead of being randomly dated, as one would expect if they were just ones accidentally lost, they were all from a very narrow space of time, and obviously had to be coming from a treasure chest, ones that were all being used at the same time. That's how the wreck was located. Well, we believe that there is a Roman wreck off the coast of Massachusetts near Beverly, and that these coins are coming from that wreck. Around 1982, I learned from an American marine archaeologist, rare people, Robert Marks, that he had visited a site off Rio de Janeiro where some Brazilian fishermen had discovered amphorae lying on the bottom of the sea. Occasionally they brought up broken pieces. Occasionally a complete amphora would be brought to the surface. They were tumbled in a heap and partly covered with coral, as you see in these 2 examples. Marx brought these ones up, sent them to specialists in ancient amphorae for dating, and the specialists at the University of Massachusetts informed him that they were manufactured in the northern part of Morocco, near Casablanca, in an ancient Roman town there, and that they date from approximately the 3rd century AD. On this map you can see Brazil in the lower part of the globe, and the portion of Africa that's showing at the top. The part just south of Gibraltar, where Casablanca is, that is where this town was. There must have been Roman ships plying across the Atlantic in the 3rd century AD. Marx contacted Professor Egerton at MIT University in Massachusetts. Egerton had invented a device called a side scanner, sonar side scanner, which could be placed on the bottom of the sea and then detect objects lying just below the surface at varying distances laterally from the detector. Egerton discovered that there were 2 masses of amphorae off the coast of Brazil, as if there were 2 wrecks, or else perhaps a wreck that had broken in half. When this information became known in the Brazilian press in December of 1982, the Brazilian government stepped in, withdrew the diving permit of the Americans, and instructed them to leave the site alone, and subsequently dropped a great deal of soil and other debris over the site, allegedly to protect it for future investigation. But it's believed that the real reason is they did not want to detract from the reputation of Cabral, who's supposed to have discovered Brazil. A similar event also occurred off Honduras, where another wreck was found with a tumbled amphory on the floor, and that site likewise was taken away from the archaeologists, this time for fear the Latin Americans feared that the reputation of Columbus would suffer. In July 1983, I received a visit from the gentleman that you see on the screen, Neil Steedy, an archaeologist working in Mexico for the National Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology, at a site called Comocalco in the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, and he brought me thousands of photographs that he and his colleagues had taken of bricks found from the site at Comocalco, which you see on the screen. Together with the bricks, there were also found a number of Mayan inscriptions like this one. 3 were found altogether, and although there was no date visible on the Mayan inscriptions, it was possible to read them and find out that they had been ceremonially buried, and that they recorded a bloodletting festival, bloodletting ceremony I should say. The month and the day could be read, but the year could not. The Mexicans supposed at this time that the site might date from about the 9th century AD. As I think I mentioned earlier, the site was made of brick, a very unusual feature in Mexican archaeology. Here are the bricks as you see them. The average weight is about 10 pounds. They're not very dissimilar from modern bricks. They're fired, good quality, have lasted very well, as you can see in the picture. And they're cemented together with a mortar made mainly from oyster shell. The remarkable thing about the bricks is that when they're lifted, or if they tumble out by accident, it's found that the lower side, the concealed side, carries extraordinary graffiti. At first it was thought that the bricks must have been taken, there's an example of a graffito, a portrait of a Mayan presumably. At first it was thought that the bricks must have been taken from another building and reused, and that the people who reused them did not wish the decoration from the previous building to show. But soon this theory had to be given up, and you'll see the reasons as we go along with this program. The graffiti were obviously made by the brickmaker when the clay was still soft, and then preserved for posterity by the firing of the bricks. The animals are depicted on many of them, crocodiles. That the reason that Neil Steedy came to see me was that they suspected that some of the bricks had writing on them. This is an example of what they thought might be writing. And as I was reputed to be a person able to deal with these strange letters, the collection of photographs of them, as I said, numbering about 4,000, was placed in my hands for study. These are more examples of the things thought to be writing. They were correct too. This particular one deals with the quality of the clay. Some of the diagrams, some of the decorations, if they were that, were patterns well known to us today, like this pentagram, for example, associated with witchcraft. The location of the site is indicated there, the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, and in this smaller section you can see Comocalco right in the middle on the coast. It was a port. The site has rolling hills around it and mounds, some of the mounds man-made. The site, as you can see, comprises a considerable number of buildings, about 300 altogether, all of them brick. And the reason for their being made of brick is that this site on the coast, which is a swampy area, does not supply stone. It may seem remarkable to us that in the absence of stone, the Mayans should be so ingenious as to invent bricks and produce their buildings that way. But however it came about, they did. The buildings vary in form. The most interesting ones are shaped like pyramids, and this is the best of all, about 100 feet high, with millions of bricks involved in making such a structure. There's the grand staircase going up the pyramid. It's hard to imagine how such enormous numbers of bricks could have been produced, but they were, arranged in horizontal tiers in a very methodical, excellent architectural scheme. The building on top of that one is a modern one. And all kinds of buildings, towers and sort of fortifications, as you see here, but mostly our interest centres in this main pyramid. In the photographs that Neil Steedy brought me, I could see at once the method of making the bricks was the same as the ancient Romans used. That is to say, the brick was shaped by hand with the help of a form, and then placed out to dry. The wet clay was placed out to dry in the sun, and then later, when it had dried, the brick was fired. The evidence for this deduction is what you see here. Obviously, children walked across the wet bricks, pressed their hands in, left their footprints, and dogs ran across them, leaving their dog prints. I have an atrium in my own home in San Diego where the tiles are from Mexico, and we were very interested and happy to discover dog footprints on some of the tiles. The tiler was going to throw them away, and I said, no, don't. It makes me think of ancient Rome. So we have them just like you see here. Methods of brick making haven't changed in Mexico over the last 2,000 years, apparently. Now, my interest switched to the graffiti which are exemplified in this picture. Regular symbols, some of them alphabetic letters, some of them not, but very neat symbols cut while the brick was wet on the surface of the brick, on the lower side, and then when the brick was fired and cemented into the pyramid, the pictures disappeared. You only see them when the brick comes out. This diagram and the one before shows what's called a histogram, where you plot the frequency of different signs. The most common one, of which we have over 200 examples, is the cross you see on the left at the top of that skyscraper-like illustration. And the other columns show progressively fewer and fewer of the less common signs. The next thing was to find out what are these signs. The history of brick making is quite ancient. Here is one going back to Sumerian times, 4,000 years ago, where the king has an inscription about him stamped very neatly onto the brick before it was fired. Here is one from Egypt, where a famous Queen Hatshepsut had her cartouche placed on bricks made in her reign. These were not fired, these ones. But searching through the archaeological literature, I discovered that there are parallels to the signs we were finding in Mexico in other places. These particular examples are from the island of Crete and date from the Minoan period. That's about 1200 to 1500 BC or even older, before the Greek civilization evolved. Now, some of the symbols there we did actually find on the Mexican bricks. And here are examples. On the left you can see 3 twig-like signs, and below a cross, a simple cross. On the right is a photograph of a Mexican brick with a sign just exactly matching one of the Minoan ones, and below is a cross. It's now in this slide. Now you see the cross at the top matching the Minoan one on the left, and then there's a rectangle with 2 bars across it, on the left, you see, that's a Minoan example, and on the Mexican brick on the right, same sign exactly impressed into the brick. So that set me, of course, on a long search through European archaeology to see what other matches we might find. At the same site in Crete where the signs we've just been looking at occur, a very important and frequent symbol is what is called the double axe. You see it in the lower left picture, engraved on stone, cut by the mason who cut the stone, and we call them mason's marks. On the other parts of the picture we have photographs of pottery, the same patterns painted on pottery. So whatever it meant to the Minoans when they used it as a mason's mark, they also found it appropriate to use it as markings on pottery. Now that was a useful hint, because from some of the ancient European civilizations we only have pottery. They didn't make bricks or stone, and we only have their pottery. Here are more examples from Mexico of the double axe symbol, very obvious. And this is another version of the double axe made looking like an hourglass on its side. These are all Mexican, and they precisely match examples found in Crete. The next thing was to do a survey of all the available signs and find out how many of them occur at different sites in Europe. On the left, upper left there, you see as many of the Mexican signs as we could find which could be matched with Crete. Next to that on the right, you see a much larger number of signs we were able to match with early Greek civilization called Helladic. This is from about 700, 800 BC. Now, the Greeks at that time were not building stone buildings, and they weren't building brick either. They were just using adobe, and the adobe has crumbled away. But they did paint their pottery, and just as the Minoans put their symbols on the pottery, so did the Greeks. Here we see in the upper row there of those dancers, a considerable number of the double axe symbol. There's Mexican examples of that same symbol, the double axe. You notice in the middle of that group of warriors the pentagram symbol, five-pointed star. Here's a Mexican example. Various other symbols, double axe again, and sundry other symbols which could be matched with the Mexican ones. The mason's set square, conspicuous in the bottom picture. Also fishes as well as pictures of animals. More of the same. All the time this double axe. Now we pass to Spain. This is a wall built during the early period of the occupation of Spain by Rome, about 300 BC. If you look carefully at the building stones, you see the same symbol, the double axe, cut on those that are showing. Not hidden away the way the Mexicans did it, but quite openly exposed. There again, Mexican examples of the same sign. The next step brings us to ancient Rome, and that's part of a cover picture of a recent publication dealing with Roman brick and tile, which I found of extraordinary assistance to me. Our thoughts were soon directed to Rome itself. Now, here you see the title page and a page of text from a volume of the Transactions of the Royal Society of London, published about 1690 or so, giving the first account of mason's marks found on Roman stones in Wales in this particular case. And there's an enlargement of the symbols. Now some of those symbols match the Mexican ones, and you notice the double axe in the middle. The A written the way it is there, we find that on the Mexican ones too, and the arrows. That started me off on a search through all the literature on Roman buildings, Hadrian's Wall between Scotland and England, and whatever sources I could find of Roman constructions in Europe. And the next series of slides, I'm going to show you a comparison of Roman examples with the Mexican ones. On the left-hand side are the Roman ones, on the right-hand side, Mexican ones. You can see each matches. The double axe at the top, the one they call the ladder in the middle, and what we would call a St. Andrew's cross or cross saltire below that. An ordinary Roman cross, and the sign that you use when you play tic-tac-toe. Again, Mexican examples. Here we have that series again. It's placed it on its side so as to fit the TV screen better. All along the bottom are Roman signs, all along the top are Mexican signs. Here are some of the symbols on Hadrian's Wall, built around the early part of the 2nd century AD. The left-hand side, Roman examples, right-hand side, the Comalcalco or Mexican examples. Symbols which relate to the tools of masons, masons set square, for example. The bottom row here all Roman, the top row all Mexican, matching all the way along. Then the book that I showed the title, thank you. This book by Dr. Brodrib, a very recent publication from Britain, reached my hand. By this time I had written to colleagues in Britain asking, what do you know about Roman bricks? And they said, the book you've got to have is Brodrib's, and they sent it to me. In Brodrib, here is a typical illustration from Brodrick on the screen, showing signs that he found on tiles made in a Roman brickyard in southern Britain. We found nearly all of those signs on the Mexican bricks too. He could date his stuff to about the 2nd, 3rd centuries AD. Here is an example. Left-hand side is one of Brodrick's tiles. Right-hand side is an exact matching example from Mexico. So this set me on a detailed comparison of how many signs can we find on the Mexican bricks which will match the ones on the Roman bricks, and that was the answer. The left-hand group are the Roman ones, right-hand ones are the Mexican ones, and sign for sign we can match them. With the aid of the information I had gathered while investigating the kinds of marks found at the various sites in Europe leading up to the Roman ones, I was able to construct a kind of table of evolution reading from the top downwards, the oldest signs at the top downwards, and the second to last line as you go down is the end of the European series, and then the last line of all is the corresponding Mexican series. So in many cases the Mexicans have the same sign. There are so many of them that they have to be placed on separate sheets as another series. And again, the bottom series are the Mexican examples. Not all the European ones can be matched yet, but you can see a great many of them are matched. And the match is always closest with the Roman ones. The Roman ones come just before the Mexican ones in that table. Now we also had signs from Spain and Portugal, what we call Iberian, as you may recall, and some of them preceding the Roman period. Here is a portion of the alphabet, Iberic or Iberian alphabet, that was used by the Iberians before the Romans went to Spain. That's just to say before about 300, 400 AD. BC, I beg your pardon, for about 300 or 400 BC. Now we found on the Mexican bricks that nearly all the Iberian alphabet was represented. So this is a very early Roman phase, a parallel phase contemporary with the Roman brickmaking, but an activity carried on in Spain and Portugal. There's more of the Iberian alphabet. Yet again more. Nearly the whole alphabet has been found so far on Mexican bricks. The Iberians also used decorations on their stoneware or bricks. For example, in this diagram, the upper left is from a site in Portugal. all the other ones are matching ones from Comalcalco in Mexico. And more. These are all Mexican. Here's another one of the signs that Brodribb found in his Roman site in England. On the left-hand side is the British version, British Roman version. Right-hand side is a matching Mexican one. We don't know what the symbol means. There's the one I showed you before. Brodribb concluded that these were signatures, as he called them, intended, he figured, to tell the overseer which pile of bricks had been made by which particular slave, so that he could check that the slaves were producing their required output of about 200 bricks per day. I think he's right about that. I would prefer the word mason's mark rather than signature, but it can't be a personal signature, because the one he found in Britain, thinking it to be the only one, is exactly matched in Mexico. So it's not a personal signature so much as rather a symbol assigned to some workman by the overseer. Or so I would conclude. Here's another one. The one on the upper left is one Brodribb found in Britain. The two on the upper row are both from Mexico. One's a mirror image of the other. Same sign. Now we have an interesting sign in the middle, that thing looking like a cup hook hanging down in the middle of this slide. Seems to be a form of what we saw before. Let's look at the one before. There, that. Looks like a cup hook. It seems to be related. And that one is from a site along Hadrian's Wall where the Romans had a military camp. And we can learn from letters that they exchanged, and which have been recently discovered at this site, that it was a symbol indicating a centurion, an officer in charge of 100 men. But on the Mexican bricks we find graffiti which look very much like centurions. Did the Mexicans know about centurions? It's an interesting thought. Here are more signs. The one on the upper right is one of Brodribb's from Britain. The other one's similar, all from Mexico. Here are more of them. Here are some from the one on the left is from a site in Germany where the Romans had a brickyard. The other two are Mexican. The lower row of bricks here are actually tiles, not bricks. These are wall tiles, very closely matching the tiles that the Romans made, with the same kind of surface decoration and the same pair of large holes at one end for attaching the tile to the wall. It seems that the Mexicans were doing just the same thing as the Romans did in that respect. Brodribb also found that the tiles produced by the Romans in Britain had a frequently recurring sign like a semicircle or a part of a circle. Sometimes just one, sometimes two semicircles, one within the other, sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 or more. Same series in Mexico. Here we see Mexican bricks with semicircular signs of the same kind as Brodribb found. Here are more of them. Some of them, the signs, the circles are so numerous they even look like fingerprints, giant fingerprints. Passing now on to letting time go by and following the different signs used by the Romans in Europe as the early centuries of the Christian era went by, we come towards the middle and end of the Roman Empire when Christians were becoming more and more numerous, and Christian symbols began to appear on the bricks made by Roman brickmakers in those centuries. Crosses in particular, Latin crosses where the vertical stroke is longer than the horizontal one, crosses which stand on 3 steps called cross Calvary, and a sign called Chi Rho made up of the initial Greek letters of the name of Christ combined into a sign. All those you see in that upper row. In the lower row you see examples from Comalcalco. Here's a Comalcalco simple Greek cross with a bars of a cross are of equal length. We have hundreds of these. It's the most common sign in Komilkalko. As the European history rolls by and Christianity becomes the dominant symbol, a whole lot of new signs come in, many of them obviously related to Christianity. Most of these we do not find in Mexico. What we do find in Mexico is the early, simple, plain cross. This is the Greek cross. Many examples. These are all Mexican examples. Sometimes a circle at the center. All of these are Mexican bricks. One of the things the Mexican archaeologists had in mind in consulting me was the hope that the writing, what they supposed to be writing, could be identified and interpreted and a date given. One of the early finds I made as I went through their photographs was this one. It's a graduated line of strokes. You can see something like a ruler. Above it are 12 little circles, and from each little circle a pair of lines comes down to enclose 4 of the smaller graduations, and below are 12 letters of the alphabet used in Carthage in northern Africa. I have drawn out here what I've just mentioned. It's obvious that we have here a calendar of 12 months. Each month has 4 weeks, and there appear to be 2 more weeks at the end that aren't assigned to a particular month. So that it looks about 50 weeks are represented, and each month, each group of 4 corresponding to each circle, which is evidently the moon, gives you the initial letter of the Carthaginian name of a month. Here is the same picture with the labels attached, identifying each of the months. Now this is a totally different kind of calendar from the one that the Mayans used. This is obviously a North African calendar, a Semitic one similar to the ones the Hebrews used. The difference here is that this is from Carthage. They began their year in the fall, whereas the Hebrews began with the month of Nisan in the spring. This is a commercial calendar. I would guess that it's a diagram drawn by a visiting Carthaginian sailor to explain to an American how the people in North Africa subdivided the year. There are the names of the months as represented by the initial letters. Another sign is on the left here. It's a part of a name or cartouche belonging to the person on the right. The way I have got my slide arranged, I'm afraid I can't get the whole thing on the TV screen. There is the cartouche. This is Libyan, and the top letter is a Y or a J, pronounced Y. The next letter is an S, and the last one is a U or W, and saying Yahshua, which is Joshua, which is also Jesus. And the next word below that is Hamin, protector. Jesus the protector. Not the whole of that, not his cartouche is visible, unfortunately. The slide was made before I realized I'd need it for my TV lecture. Here's another one with a person with his mouth open, and a rectangular symbol with a set of letters in it to the left. At first we thought these were the names of a people. We thought that person before was supposed to represent Jesus, and we supposed that this would be the name of the person you saw a moment ago. Let me put him back on again, this wild looking individual with his mouth open. But when we read what he's saying, it turned out that it's not his name. When the Mayans wanted to have one of their gods or other characters on their monuments say something, they represented them with their mouth open and what was called a scroll, a voice scroll or speech scroll, like a spiral coming out of his tongue, with whatever was written there being supposed to be what he was saying. These are evidently the equivalent. These are like the bubbles that are coming out of comic strip figures' mouths. This man is saying, the top letters are not showing, the miracle of the Messiah was foretold by the prophets. He's evidently a Christian preacher saying that. Now, those of us, I had to consult another Semitic specialist about the word miracle, because it didn't seem to make sense talking about the Messiah as a miracle. It's not what we understand by a miracle. But he assured me that that must be what it was saying. Later, I did some research into the terminology used by the North African Church in early years, and I found that it has persisted into modern times in Ethiopia. And in their terminology, the Christians of Ethiopia have 5 major miracles. One of them is the Virgin Mary, and another one is Jesus Christ. They use this term miracle. So we realize we have here a North African Christian preacher. Here's another one where we have a person that looks like a Mayan looking at a Christian cross, and on the cross are letters which spell Kodesh, or words similar to that used in different North African languages, meaning most holy. Clearly we're dealing with Christians. The first one I showed you of this series, the one where the calendar was explained, gave us a clue as to the date. The Carthaginian letters on the calendar change with time, and we could see from the form of the letters used on that calendar that it was around the 3rd century AD. Now, that was the first indication we had as to a date, and it surprised the Mexicans because they thought that the pyramid dated from the 9th century. Here's some more of the kinds of things that Roman brickmakers put on their bricks. This is the word satis. It's interesting that he's used a Greek S at the end of a word which otherwise is Latin. Enough, it means. He'd had enough work for that day, apparently, and he wrote enough on this brick. Here's somebody being reported by somebody else, a gentleman called Australis, and somebody else who scrawled this on the wet clay before it was fired, is saying Australis was absent for work for 13 days. Here's another one where 3 people are saying that Pentarchus is a cheat, and they've written their 3 names underneath. Why they wrote that, I don't know. It must have been reporting to the overseer, perhaps. Occasionally on British bricks there are found Roman numerals, thought to indicate a tally, how many bricks were done that day or something like that. The lower band in this particular is from a Roman brick from Britain, with Roman numerals on it. The upper band is a Mexican one. It looks as if it's a numeral, and the numerals are sometimes written back to front. This seems to be 7 written backwards. This might be 9 or it might be 11, according to which way you read it. This is from a Mexican brick. These are the only Latin letters we can find. All the other alphabetic letters are either Iberian or North African. Apparently slaves from those areas who were under Roman rules of production and using their own alphabets. This one, the word on the right, laba, means unfired clay. Apparently a label that was on a heap of clay, I suppose. Here is one where we have a number of letters. It's saying fired brick manufactured from sun-dried clay. Why they wrote that, I don't know, but that's what they were doing. And the language is Libyan. There are the letters with their sound values inserted. By Libyan, I should explain, we mean North Africa other than Egypt, not just the country called Libya today, but everything between Egypt and Morocco was called Libya in ancient times and used this kind of writing. There's another comment on the on the quality of the clay. I mentioned earlier the cross Calvary, the one you see in the middle of these signs here, a Latin cross standing on 3 steps, a very common Christian sign in the early years of Christianity, and the crosses. Here we see on the left a coin issued by the Byzantine emperors of Constantinople, with the cross Calvary as the main feature on the coin. It's a gold coin. On the right is the kind of coin that the first Muslim caliphs of Baghdad issued around year 693 or so, when the Muslims were first coming into competition with the Romans and their successors, the Byzantine monarchs. The Muslims were anxious that their coins should be accepted as good currency, so they imitated the design of the Christian Byzantine monarchy, but their good Muslim precepts forbade them from putting a Christian cross on. So what they did, as you can see, was they curled the crossbar of the Christian cross round to make a circle with the vertical passing through it, and otherwise left it as a cross Calvary standing on 3 steps. Here are examples of Mexican bricks with the cross Calvary showing on the left. It's a broken brick, but you can see it's a cross Calvary. And on the right, again, 2 Mexican bricks with 2 versions of the Muslim distortion of the cross. One Muslim method of dealing with the cross was to convert it into just a vertical column standing on 3 steps. The other one just above is the one we saw in the preceding picture, where we have a circle penetrated by the vertical cross. That's as you see it on the right hand side above there. So both types occur on the Mexican bricks. Here is another Christian symbol that occurs in the catacombs, a vaulted cross of a vault erected over it. Here is a very typical Christian symbol, and the complete lettering, as you see it on the brick on the right, and as you see it drawn out by hand on the left, the complete lettering is iota, the lower one, it looks like an I, alpha, and then the one that's missing from our slide is omega. Iota, alpha, omega. That's a Christian abbreviation for Jesus, Alpha, Omega. Jesus, the beginning and the end, quoting from the Gospels. The lower symbol, a Roman cross or Latin cross of a bird standing beside it, is the symbol of the Holy Spirit. And you see a vaulted cross on the right. These are all from Mexican bricks. Time went by and the Europeans lost their hegemony over the Mediterranean. The Muslims became the dominant nation and colonized Africa, dominated much of Spain, even parts of France. In the north of Europe, the Christians devoted their energy to building the great cathedrals, and their masons made their masons' marks. In this table, which is covering the latter part of the first millennium AD, the first few signs are ones used, that's in the top middle, first 2 signs are the ones used by the Byzantine architects or masons. All the other ones are ones from the Gothic cathedrals and the cathedrals of Spain and Portugal. Masons' marks were used at the end of the first millennium, and here are ones used after that, 1200, 1300 AD and whatnot. None of these signs occur in Mexico at all. So the break with the Roman world and its successors must have occurred about that time. Here we have impending evidence of what must have happened next in Mexico, and this is going to be the end of my story today. This is Arabic, a language we haven't encountered before, and it's the Arabic word shara. You read it from right to left, which curiously enough means mason's mark, and with it the portrait of one of the men who might have made that writing. It looks just like a modern Tunisian, an Arab, wearing his turban with the rosette of Tunisia on his turban, and that's a good point to leave the story. Well, we're left with the wonder in our minds. Were Romans themselves in North America, in Mexico in particular? Were they producing this great pyramid? Romans didn't build pyramids ordinarily. There is a small pyramid in Rome, but otherwise the Romans were not interested in pyramids. Why should bricks with Roman markings on them appear in a pyramid? And how come that they're in Mexico? My suggestions are that the Romans were trading with North America. When I say Romans, I mean Roman citizens, not necessarily speaking Latin. They could have been Spaniards, Portuguese, perhaps speaking Iberian, or Celts from that part of Europe. They could have been, and obviously were in the case of this pyramid, North Africans, using their own North African languages related to Berber and written with that script we call Libyan or Numidian, of which we saw examples. And also latter-day Carthaginians, even though Rome destroyed Carthage during the Third Carthaginian War before the time of Christ, nonetheless Carthage was resettled, and people did still call themselves Carthaginians and speak Punic. I've been to a site in North Africa where a beautiful theatre for the presentation of Greek plays is absolutely intact, and written on the wall is a statement saying this theatre was restored by Hannibal. Evidently that, and the date is given in a form which we can interpret as being 1 AD. Evidently by that date Hannibal had lost its H and now became Hannibal, as it still is in Italy today. Well, these were traders, no doubt, who were embarking on private expeditions across the Atlantic, particularly from North Africa and Spain. I would imagine they would be interested in furs. In the case of Latin America, probably gold also. And that they would be bringing to the peoples of those parts of America tools such as bronze, axes and whatnot, which the Americans at that time did not know how to make. The Mayans afterwards learned how to do so, but at that time, 2,000 years ago, they didn't know how to make them. I would further guess that some of these expeditions may have ended in disaster, either shipwreck or capture of the crew by hostile Mayans, and that some of them told their captors about brickmaking, and the people of Comilcalco, who had no stone, would become intensely interested in this information and said, okay, make bricks. I don't think they would be made voluntarily. I think the brickmakers must have been slaves, captives. I'm judging by my own country, New Zealand, what happened when New Zealand was first settled in the early 1800s. Sailors would run away from the ship, simply fail to report back on ship, because the Maoris of New Zealand very urgently wanted to have Europeans living with them so that they could act as interpreters for trading. I imagine in the first case, when the ships first began to come to America from the Old World, many sailors would abscond and live it up in great comfort in North America as compared with their uncomfortable life back home. But as time went by, their services would become less valued, and I think probably a stage would be reached when sailors would simply be captured to serve as slaves, useful slaves who knew how to do things that American slaves did not know how to do. I think we're only using the word Roman in this context to indicate the era to which the people belonged. The whole world was basically Roman. In the first 4 centuries AD, the known world was Roman, even though the citizens were not born in Italy.
It's always a pleasure to have Dr. Barry Fell with us, and we thank him and his lovely wife for sharing the time that they have with us and her support for Dr. Fell as they bring this wonderful information to us that we may grow and learn of those things that have been in this hemisphere. How precious it is to see the documented proof. You know, that's the beauty of documentation. It proves reality. We hope that we can bring you many more wonderful lectures by Dr. Fell as he shares with us the wealth of knowledge and information that he possesses in things around this world concerning those years that have gone by. Again, we thank them very much. I know you've enjoyed it, and thanks again. God bless.